Well, hello, and how do you do?
I do good, thanks. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Welcome to another episode of Totem Talks, Season 5, Episode 4. And
That checks out. I had to double check. It's like, no, you're right.
I'm always right. I will never be wrong again now.
Well,
With
I
this
know,
new
I know.
format, I can't be wrong.
I know, but I still, 4 seasons of trauma of you getting the wrong episode. It's just stuck in my brain.
Look, I understand. There were times.
I
But
know.
those are behind
Those times
us.
They are.
Welcome in, everybody. I'll tell you a few things. One, this episode was a nightmare to logistically record this week.
Oh, yeah.
So normally we do our, on season 5, 5 is live, so we do Thursdays at 5:30 Eastern on Twitch, twitch.tv/TotemTalks. And this week we had a gig on Thursday, so that is, of course, out. A gig where I have never been more soaking wet at a gig than I was on Thursday.
And it didn't even rain.
We started the gig and we got 5 or 6 songs in,
About that.
and the heavens opened up.
They did.
And so we just had to huddle. I had to protect our PA system with my body. But then the rest of the gig,
you had to move my keyboard and microphone while I was still in the middle of playing a song.
Yeah.
And that was fun.
I'm like, back up, just moving the keyboard. I'm like, anything else can go. This is the most expensive thing we have.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, it all worked out. It was a fun one. But yeah, so we didn't record on Thursday. Friday, wanted to record, had some power issues on my end, due to construction being done, reparations as I called it yesterday. And then yesterday we were in the studio recording our album, so couldn't really Totem Talks it up. No. So today is Sunday. It is Sunday morning.
Rain is falling.
Yeah, and so we had this really steadfast, set in stone plan for 10 a.m. and it's now 11:23 because somebody on the podcast, now I won't tell you who, it's one of us, decided to run 10 miles this morning. You be the judge which one of us it was.
Right.
It could be Nick, it could be me. Now that there's video, I feel like the answer's clear. It's obviously me.
You did run 10 miles. Very proud of you.
You can determine. But yeah, that's your new PB, right? Your new PB. You can announce that, right?
That is correct. That is a new personal best.
Yeah.
It's not my new peanut butter, for the record. Peanut butter had nothing to do with it.
Well, now I think it did. I think you're lying.
Nor did the Pottery Barn.
I mean, does the Pottery Barn? It really is everything, though. It encompasses all of the world.
That's true.
The pottery.
Yeah.
You know what I wish the Pottery Barn encompassed? The artists we did this week. Why don't you tell people who they are?
I will tell you that we started things out with Blur this week. We moved right along to Joy Division, and we finished things out with Blink 182.
Yes, we in fact did. So here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to start. I'm going to just go right into it, okay?
Tell us a little bit about Blur.
Blur are an English rock band formed in London in 1988. The group consists of singer Damon Albarn, guitarist Graham Coxon, bassist Alex James, and drummer Dave Roundtree. Now, they've been active from 1988 to the present. Now, they do something weird with their years active. Most other bands have their just years that they were and weren't together all together. They're like, we've been together since 1988 to the present day, but We went on hiatus from 2004 to 2008, and also from 2016 to 2018. So, like, it's interesting the way they do it. They do it a little differently. The three albums that we covered 1991's Leisure, as we discussed, because they're British, so leisure, not leisure.
That's right.
We followed that up with 1994's Park Life, and then we wrapped it up with 2015's The Magic Whip.
Whip.
Yes, Whip.
That's with 3 H's.
Now, would you like to go first, Nick?
I certainly have no issue going first.
Why don't you then?
All right, sure. So, Leisure. A record with very high reviews and ratings. However, Damon Albarn, very critical of it, actually, in retrospect. He has said it's one of 2 bad records he's made in his career. Like, he just isn't happy with it. He thinks that the band, because it was their first record, basically kind of kowtowed to what the labels wanted a little too much. This being 91, a UK band, the emergence of Britpop. I mean, Blur is definitely one of the iconic Britpop artists of this era, along with Oasis. However, this wasn't the album they wanted. I don't think it's as nearly as bad as he claimed. And to me, honestly, no spoilers. I listened a little out of order this week. And so when this album came on, the songs were honestly a little bit of a breath of fresh air. I will not tell you who I'm comparing them to until later on, or what I'm comparing them to. But it actually felt, and I don't know if that was just because of what I had listened to before, that I didn't mind it. I didn't love it, but there were definitely moments. Like the song "There's No Other Way," I thought was probably the strongest one. I felt like the instruments were really grooving on that song. They were showing that they could lock together a little bit there. And there was some cool, like, psychedelic shoegazy type tones and effects going on throughout this record. I think there are redeeming qualities to this record. I understand why someone like Damon Albarn doesn't love it in retrospect. Like, he's had a pretty successful career between both Blur and Gorillaz, and he's comparing his very best work to what he sees.
That blew my mind when I read that.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that the guy from I knew Blur and I knew Gorillaz, did not know it was the same guy.
Absolutely. Yeah, very cool
I read
career.
that,
like,
and it blew my mind.
Super accomplished songwriter. Like, very big fan of Damon Albarn personally. Like, I think he does a great job. He's an excellent songwriter. But, I agree with him, though. This wasn't his best work, but a lot of redeeming qualities in it still.
Sure. First off, gotta thank the Guitar Dude 28. All good bass players are named Alex.
That's true.
Although, shouldn't you be the bass dude 28 then? Wouldn't that make more sense?
Nope.
I mean, although I found out yesterday he doesn't really play that. He only hopes that he can play that instrument.
That's true. Hopefully.
That's a super niche inside joke that no one gets.
That's how you attract fans.
Exactly. I'm a little more critical. I agree with Damon Albarn here. Albarn. This wasn't great to me. I knew the reputation of Blur, and I'd heard one of them, the one from Trainspotting. I've heard that song enough that I recognized. Yeah. But the rest of the songs, like, they really just felt kind of boring. That's like the term that I can come up with, boring. I didn't really hear anything that stood out to me. Like when we did Oasis back at season 1, episode 1, that is their kind of comp in the scene here. And there was so many moments on the Oasis albums, regardless of, I think that I think the Gallaghers are better singers. Regardless of that fact, like not even putting that in here, I literally just think that there was more like innovation happening on their albums than this. I mean, just the opening track, She's So High, felt almost like a letdown from what I would like from the opening track of your opening album. and I'm a little bored. And then there's 11 other songs for 50 minutes. So I kind of agree with Damon Albarn here. Honestly, that felt good to me, that he was like, yo, that album was pretty bad. Like, I didn't like that one. I was like, oh, thank God. Good. I feel better. And I'm not going to say too much. I'm not going to harp on it. It wasn't the worst thing I ever heard, but I definitely get his criticism.
There was room for improvement.
Yeah. So I'll take us into Park Life. And first off, legitimately, so I listened to this album while I was, doing some review and stuff at work. And the album cover kept popping up on my phone as it changed songs. Mm-hmm. For the life of me, I was like doing something. I was like kind of in the zone, so I didn't want to look at it. And I just was like, what the hell is that album? What is on that album cover? What is that? Is that a picture of the band? Like, just from
a picture of the band?
From my peripheral. From my peripheral vision. And then so finally I had to pick up my phone and look. I'm like, oh, it's dogs.
I was gonna say, isn't it a greyhound race? That's what it looks like to me.
It's pups.
Yeah.
But it was hilarious to me that I could not, for the life of me, figure out what it was. Okay, so going into the actual music now, this is a step up. This album is significantly better than the first album. Again, Britpop to me is something that I don't always relate to. Like, it's hard for me to kind of extrapolate on that a little bit, but like, I find Britpop to be slightly less approachable than other versions of pop to me.
Classic American.
And that's fine. I'm not saying I hate it. I'm saying like, there are times when I'm like, all right, I get it, but I don't like it. But I really didn't get that much here. Like, I really enjoyed Girls and Boys right in the opening track. I thought the title track was really good. I thought that throughout there were moments. I really enjoyed the instrumental piece. Was not that's just interesting to have. Can you imagine like an American pop album with just an instrumental on it?
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. So like, really enjoyed it. A real step up. You can tell that they had a little bit more control over it.
Oh, yeah.
And that is kind of the all-encompassing thing. This is more the sound that they wanted, and throughout I noticed that and enjoyed it.
Okay, cool. So I want to preface this by saying, so there's this quote, something that Damon Albarn said in 1990, so before their first album even came out. He was talking to a group of journalists, and he said, and I quote, "When our third album comes out, our place as the quintessential English band of the 90s will be assured. That is a simple statement of fact. I intend to write it in 1994. So here we are.
Wow.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, this album is definitely where Blur really starts to see of one of the biggest acts from the UK of this decade. I mean, like, absolutely true. So, I mean, he wasn't necessarily spot on, and I think there's definitely arguments to say they're not the biggest, but they're definitely in contention. They were very influential throughout the decade on all of British music acts.
Any artist or athlete will tell you, it's all up here, man. You got to be the best up here.
Sure.
So like, I totally get it.
Good for him. Pretty much universally rave reviews, with one exception that I could find, which was, of course, Robert Christgau, who said the only good song. Yeah, the only good song on the album was "Girls and Boys." He said, which was the only song on this album I didn't really like. It was the only one I didn't like. I really liked this whole album. I could live without that first song, though. I felt like this album was a little, whereas the first one kind of, like you said, it was a little slow, it was a little boring. Maybe it relied a little too much on psychedelic or shoegazy type sounds. I thought this album was a little bit of everything that came before it. Like, I could definitely hear influence across a wide spectrum of genres, across a wide spectrum of decades that went into this record. I felt at times it was like very Baroque. I thought that, honestly, if the
Well,
what
if it ain't Baroque,
don't
don't
fix it.
fix it.
Now, I really felt there were times, like, throughout this album, when Albarn was on the very top of his writing game, where I was like, yeah, this is probably what the Beatles would have sounded like if they were making records in the 90s.
Wow.
Which is very high praise because, I
That's super high praise from you.
really respected the songwriting style, and the variance in this record. I think it was really strong. It definitely showed what this group could be. And I'm just
Yeah.
gonna say that and move right along into the Magic Whip, which was another record released to universal acclaim. That seems to be a pretty common theme with all these Blur records. And it's another good record. I don't think it is quite as good as Parklife, but I don't think it was a huge drop off either. I think what was interesting about this record is that I could hear the Blur from each of the first two albums in it. It was definitely maybe a little spacier than Parklife, and that's where I heard a little bit more of Leisure in there. But it was spacey at times, just enough in a nice way. And this album was after like a 12-year hiatus of making any new music.
Yeah.
And I really do feel like, considering all that, like they still put out a very good album that I would happily listen to again. So maybe not like the tip top of their work, but it definitely was kind of an amalgamation of what I knew Blur to be after listening to the first two records and then kind of advancing through time.
Sure. I totally get where you're coming from. I agree with you in kind of the fundamental aspect of it. I enjoyed it more than Leisure, less than Parklife, somewhere in the middle for me. This just seems like a band and a group who, as we listened to them, became more sure of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect that. I felt like I could kind of tell, because they recorded this in two locations, in Hong Kong and London, and
Right.
you kind of get that on the album cover, that there's there's symbols, there's Asian symbols on it, that can kind of, you can understand they incorporated it. I feel like I could tell that it was an album telling two stories almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like maybe they were in two different spaces as they were in two different spaces, which I thought was interesting. Again, Britpop normally isn't my top genre. However, this is, I think at this point, barely Britpop, more alt-rockish, kind of like an indie album. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I thought that it was very solid throughout. It was nice to hear an artist, like a pop artist, not descend into the depths of like electronic, computerized ambiance and stuff like that. They still were putting together like analog music, and even though like you can use ambiance and electronic stuff, but not just rely on it. And it felt like they never went down that rabbit hole that so many pop artists do. And I appreciated it. Let's grade them.
Let's do it. All right. So, again, we're going to start in a place where maybe listening to this as Americans, we're not quite as used to this idea of Blur being as big of an act as they really were. But they were pretty huge in the UK, and they sold well throughout the world, really. I mean, I'm comparing them to Oasis quite a bit. There have been articles written about it in retrospect and stuff like that. It was very much a, who is the biggest act coming out of the UK? Who is going to win the 90s and the early 2000s? Like, is Oasis the biggest, or is it Blur? Is it Oasis, or is it Blur? Who's going to get the next big single?
It was Oasis.
Who's going to chart higher? Sure.
It was a spoiler alert.
But what I'm saying is, like, it was pretty close between the two of them.
Yeah.
It was pretty close. Oasis definitely had more of the single factor in the United States. but Blur was also having a lot of success. So this is not a nobody band at all. Just
No,
because you only ever heard song 2 doesn't mean there's not plenty going on.
for sure. But what score would that
I mean,
give
that
them
puts me
here?
somewhere near around the middle.
Okay, I would say a little under the middle.
Okay.
Under a 5, because while they were big when they were big, over a 5 usually means either sustained success or like absolute household name. Like, even if you're
So
not still famous, you're a
my
household name.
quick question. Would you
Yeah.
consider every single album you've released reaching number 1 in the UK from 1994 to the present sustained success?
I could think that. I mean, that
Because
would be...
every album they've released since 94 has been number 1 in the UK.
What chart, though? What chart?
The Billboard Top 200 in the UK? I mean, they're
Oh,
number
okay.
1
Oh,
on
that's
each
good.
one. Yeah.
Okay. So, hold on. That's good. But, like,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, oh, we're top of the chart. And it's like, which chart? It's like, it's indie
The
alternative.
indie folk, yeah. No. I mean, like, every album is number 1 in the UK since 94.
Then I
Since
will
Park Life.
amend my score from the 4.8 I wanted to give them to a 5.2.
Okay. Very good.
You convinced me.
Excellent. I'm glad. I think we're looking. Well, I know we're looking at 8 albums, so a little over the average. I think there's more good than bad here. I'm willing to give a little bit of a quality bump, and they've sold about 15 million records, so I think we're looking at a little bit of a sales bump as well. I think this is a good score. Probably very high 5s.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I was thinking like a 5.9. That sounds about right. I don't want to bump them too much for the quality. Because while I appreciated what they were doing and they sounded good at times, I never went like, whoa, that's... I know you compared them to
Park
potential
Life,
Beatley.
I think really
Park Life had the most
hold
promise for me, and I think it already has held up, Nick. It's nearly 30 years old.
Like, upon us re-listening to it, like, I think you would really grow to appreciate all those songs even more.
Sure.
But that brings us to instrumental talent, and this to me is the most of it.
Is what
like
it is.
It never took me out of it. It also never impressed. Like, I didn't think that what they were doing was too uncomplicated. I definitely didn't think it was too complicated either. It just was very solid. Like, to me, again, this is kind of the epitome of what a 5 looks like in this category.
Sure, and a 5 totally fits for me.
Yeah. But songwriting, I think, is definitely better. I think Damon Albarn definitely shows some chops here. Each of these 3 albums, we obviously didn't like Leisure nearly as much, but each album was distinctly different. I think each album distinctly drew from multiple different genres of music, and the compositions were mostly very interesting, particularly on the last 2 records. So to me, that's another good score, maybe even their best score of the day, like in the 6-ish neighborhood.
I could go to a 6, I think.
Yeah.
I think that for me particularly, it's the reinvention multiple times.
Yeah, definitely.
that I appreciate as as an artist for them to do.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go with the 6 there, and then it just brings us to Poetic.
I think there's times when it's good. I mean, this is going to be an above average score.
Sure.
There are times, there are moments when the writing and the emotion is good. I feel like I didn't necessarily hear any like cheese or campiness.
No.
But at the same time, I wasn't like reverently blown away by the lyrics as either.
Sure.
So, but I'd be very comfortable putting them at like a 5.4, 5.5 ish.
Sure, I'll give them the 5.5. And then X Factor. So what I'll say for this is, 1, I mean, quote unquote, the battle of Britpop, the back and forth between Blur and Oasis on the charts, and that battle, and like all of the interest in music that it stirred throughout that time. It was definitely something that was being written about quite a bit, and it's worth mentioning here. And also, they did receive the Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music in 2012. So,
Okay.
I think those things might give them like a 0.2 or 0.3 here. I think that's at least worth mentioning.
Let's give them the 0.3. I'm feeling it.
Excellent. All right. And then we can move right along to Joy Division.
Joy Division were an English rock band formed in Salford in 1976. And they were active until 1980. And that's it. We did every album they released, which is Unknown Pleasures from 1979 and Closer from 1980.
Yes.
And okay, all right.
It's your turn to go first.
It's my turn to go first. And what is there to say about Unknown Pleasures? It was recorded in Strawberry Studio in Stockport. It is 39 minutes and 28 seconds long. It's considered post-punk or gothic rock. It was produced by Martin Hannett.
All right,
for the Factory label.
Let's go.
Man, talk about an album that just, for the entire length, which is 39 minutes and 28 seconds, missed everything that I consider music all at the same time. I don't want to say this album was hot garbage.
All right.
Because I feel like maybe I can compare it to like worse music in my life.
Sure.
Like from beginning to end, if you put that on, I would be like, "Oh, that's music that I hate."
Sure. Yeah.
As opposed to like some of the artists we've done where I would be like, "Hey, your CD player's broken." However, just from top to bottom, just really bad for me. Really unenjoyable. I've heard so many things about Joy Division. I've heard their name more often than I ever should have after listening to this. Post-punk is already a sticky genre for me. And this is just not good. And honestly, here's what I'm going to tell you. The main issue that I have, and I again, I'm not speaking ill of the dead here, but he just could not sing. Ian Curtis,
right?
Who did, unfortunately, the reason the band broke up was he unfortunately committed suicide at 23 years old. All that is very sad on a personal level, but the dude couldn't sing. There's no semblance of pitch here. It's not even pitch adjacent. It's like he was told what the pitch was and then had to just guess what that meant. Like if they were just like, yeah, this is the key of G, but didn't play any starting note, and he just went.
Right.
Like that's what it almost sounds like. It's so out of tune the whole way through. I read a couple like articles and stuff where they just kept commenting on his quote unquote iconic baritone voice. And I was like, it is something iconic if it's bad.
Can be.
Right, like that's what it is, right? Should you say like his infamous baritone voice?
Infamous might be a better word.
Yeah, I hated this. I knew their big song, which we ironically didn't technically cover.
It was
but we will.
It was a
about
single.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about. I mean, it's
Sure.
Love Will Tear Us Apart.
Right.
It's going to be included in their score. We'd be foolish not to. It's
Sure.
their kind of one hit.
But they're huge. Yeah.
But I knew that song and I knew I hated it, and so I was like, well, I'm ready for this, and I even then wasn't ready for it.
Okay. So I'll tell you what is iconic, Patrick. This album cover. This is one of those images that is ubiquitous in the music scene. Like it's everywhere. This is such a famous cover. It's maybe the best thing about the album, which has received near perfect professional reviews. It is ranked number 40 according to Enemy in their top 500 greatest albums of all time. Rolling Stone ranked it 211th on their top 500 greatest albums of all time, which leads me to ask the question, is Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division the single most overrated album in the history of popular music? Because this album sucked.
Hold on now.
I'm just asking the question because it's one of the most influential and iconic records, like particularly of the last 45 years, but really ever. And I'm going to be honest with you, Pat. There was not a single thing I enjoyed about it.
I feel like you could argue Pavement in that category.
Yeah, but it's worth considering. Maybe we'll
They're bad.
Maybe we'll dedicate an episode sometime in the future to trying to figure out what the most overrated record is. I think that's worthwhile.
I would be okay with that.
But yeah, I mean, so first of all, let me say, usually, I'm a little bit more forgiving than you are with vocals for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One, I listen to music first, and on this record, I didn't enjoy the guitar tone really. I thought it was kind of off-putting. And other than that, there was nothing going on in the music that I thought was interesting enough to hang on to. So then I was kind of like left to wherever the vocals would take me. And two, I don't mind someone who's not a very good singer if the music is good and they're at least in the key and on pitch. And it's like, okay, you don't have the most classically nice voice in the world, but you're singing all notes in a key. So like I can sing along and it's good. It doesn't sound terrible.
Right.
There were no notes in a key at any point.
No.
Like, the best thing I can say about Ian Curtis's voice is at best he sounds like a tone-deaf Joey Ramone, and at worst he sounds like David Byrne had 7 concussions.
And if anybody is still here from the Talking Heads episode, you'll know how I feel about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I need to say about Unknown Pleasures. I think we get the idea. So I'm going to go to Closer. This album, it was released after Ian Curtis's suicide, so Unknown Pleasures was the only record that was actually released during his lifetime. And it was more universal acclaim and more completely unlistenable trash vocals. And you know what this made me think of, honestly? 'Cause just relating back to earlier this season. This is why when we did Susie and the Banshees, I was like, this is the kind of post-punk that I can actually get behind and listen to. Because our other options, like Susie and the Banshees, are 100,000 million times better than Joy Division.
Yeah.
Like, because all of the songs are in a key and listenable. And like, that's the only bar you need to pass. I mean, the delivery on his vocals at some points, like, straight up verges on parody of the genre. Like, it doesn't even sound like he's trying to sing post-punk anymore. It sounds like an SNL skit where they're making up the most ridiculous possible post-punk song and like delivering it in the most ridiculous, absurd, over-the-top way. Like, everything about it screamed, don't even take this seriously.
Yeah.
But somehow, like, just universal acclaim, and I just don't get Joy Division at all. I don't know what there is to get. Like, what is there to enjoy about boring songs sung by the worst person at karaoke night? And not just the worst person at karaoke night, but the person who like goes up and really thinks that they're the best and sounds awful. Because that's what it sounds like.
And listen, I obviously agree. Here's what I'll tell you. This album is 44 minutes and 16 seconds. Also on the factory label. Martin Hannett comes back. There's something that was a quote that I read that really kind of summed things up to me. Martin Hannett was quoted as saying that Joy Division, in his time working with them, was a producer's dream because they had absolutely no clue and never argued about anything.
They just
which means
whatever.
they just didn't know what they were doing and
Correct.
just let the studio push them in a direction. Which here's my issue with that. If that is what was happening, why are they so critically acclaimed?
I don't know.
I would like it more if I found out that the studio was like, no, 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 we don't think that," and they were like, "No,
No, this is
this
our
is our
bid.
artistic yeah."
Right. Hmm.
But like if they're just like, "Oh, whatever, man," and
Yeah,
then
no,
and
I agree with that. And you know what? I think there's a lot to be said for having a good producer who's willing to give you suggestions and opinions.
100%,
And like absolutely any good artist will take that into account and consider it, maybe try it out, see what to keep, what they totally
yeah,
agree with, what they disagree with. But to have no idea what you're doing and to just like let all the decisions be taken out of your hands completely, that's totally different to me.
yeah. So yeah, this is trash. This is really bad. Joy Division is an artist that I just could not understand less or get the appeal
Yep.
of less.
Don't get it.
And that is that.
Okay.
Let's grade them.
All right. So here's the thing. Again, never really hit in the United States compared to the UK and some other places. Cannot deny the influence that they've had on alternative music.
Sure,
Can't
of
deny it.
course.
They're definitely influential. They are, in fact, in the UK Music Hall of Fame as of 2005. Um, there is something there. Like Bono said, that Joy Division was one of the most important bands. Um, like they were
Yeah.
important for a time. For a 2-album band where, they didn't necessarily hit in the United States, it's about as high as you can be for that.
I mean, yeah, and then you can just look at the list of bands that have claimed influence by Joy Division: The
For sure.
Cure, U2, Soundgarden, The Proclaimers,
Fascinating.
which is just very interesting to hear that they okay. So like, there's also Block Party, Editors, Interpol, but I didn't know those three, so
Mm,
I didn't say them.
I
But you
understand.
might at home know them.
Interpol, probably, of the 3.
Yeah, I think I do know Interpol now that I said it out loud. Regardless,
I mean, I've got to give
they've
them a couple points here.
there's a couple points here. They get the point for Level Tear Us Apart as a one hit wonder because that
They
one did.
definitely get, in the United States, sure. They definitely get a point at least for being in the UK Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so
And
that's
then they get some
two.
stuff for influence.
And I would be willing to give them up to a full point pending your.
I'd be I think 3 is the least we can do here.
Then let's give them a
Because
3.
we're going to murder them. um,
I want to be clear: we will not murder anyone, especially given
no.
that there's a tragic death in this
Figurative.
band.
Figurative.
Scores
Score
are about
related.
to go
Breadth of work.
low.
There are 2 albums.
Yes.
They did both go gold in the UK. They were both hot garbage to listen to. So I'm taking the
and
golds away
and gold in the
lowering them.
UK. Like, here's the thing. I know I've said this so many times. We tend to kind of discount non-American certifications,
Just because they're a
but
lot
that
less
is
people.
literally only because the sales thresholds are so reduced
Sure.
because it's based on population.
Yeah. All right,
So
look,
like,
here's the highest I
that's
can
it.
go. 1.2. Because I'm giving them a 1.8 for 2 records. I'm giving them a 1.92 for 2 British Golds, and I'm taking away like 0.7, 0.8 for how bad it was. And that's my formula, and that's how I
1.2
worked it out.
feels so high.
Look, I told you my thought process. If you want to try to change it, you're welcome to.
I would like to give them a 1.1.
Done. Instrumental talent. Here's what I'll say. In terms of the compositions that they put forward in those 2 albums, I heard nothing really of note in the music whatsoever.
Yeah.
It
That's
was
not true. I heard a lot of things of note.
Yeah, they were notes, but unfortunately, the singer didn't sing any of it. Look, I would have been under for what I heard in the music, and that was a stylistic choice. Like, let me be real, like that was the sound they were going for. It was just a non-complex sound, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but there wasn't a lot of place to show off musical chops in the songs. And the singing, like he was a 0.1 as a vocalist. Like if he ever hit a single note that was in the key of the song, it was by pure accident.
Yeah, it was a total accident.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a straight up 0.1 on the. This is as bad as vocals can be with an actual human being still trying to sing notes.
Yeah. That's yeah.
I'll give him a 2.
A full 2.
That's
full 2 points.
Because nothing about the musicianship was bad. It was just very simple and uninteresting.
I'll allow it, I guess, but like, ooh, that feels high.
Yeah. Again, so songwriting, look, it was very influential songwriting, and they were an important part of the post-punk sound, so that is where any of the credit that they get comes from. But the songs were boring. I'm going to be honest, like, writing a good melody line is a part of songwriting, and if your melody line is constantly out of key with the rest of what you're doing, it makes it sound worse. Like, it takes away from the quality of the song.
It definitely does.
So again, I am under, and we're only starting at a 1.8 because it's 2 records anyway. So like, I'm again down in like the low ones.
I would like a 1.
Done. And then poetic talent. This is the one thing that Ian Curtis is supposed to be like very highly revered for. So I'll let you take it away.
And I'll tell you what, like going through and reading some of the like poem and lyric, and kind of reading into a little bit of the story and the process of him writing, I think that like he did that very well. Mm-hmm. I like that is by far the best part of this group. Would have loved to maybe hear some of Ian Curtis's writings and lyrics and songs done by a band. Sure. That would have been really sick. But again, there's 2 albums, so we're starting at a 1.8.
Yeah.
But I would be really comfortable here going somewhere in like the mid 2s, a little higher even. Like,
I'd be happy. Sure.
I think that maybe like a 2.6. I think that
you got it.
I really enjoyed reading the words to some of these songs.
And that's nice that we can have a nice thing to say. Is there X Factor here? I mean, I think Ian Curtis's death is definitely, an event. It was, very unfortunate, but it is something that makes the band.
And I mean, I will say, like, so Ian Curtis's death did, quote unquote, stop Joy Division, but the rest of the group did immediately reform as New Order.
Yeah.
And like that, so they still are work together and playing. I didn't really look. I think they're all still together. At least maybe 1 or 2 of them is not.
Right.
But
well, we'll catch that when we catch that.
When we catch New Order, I'm not going to get into that. But unlike other artists who like they really did, like the band broke up when they died. Like they didn't really break up. They just changed their name.
Sure.
Which is fine, out of respect, and I totally get that.
Yeah. So do we give a point here for X Factor?
I would say it's a point. Yeah, I don't want to go too crazy, but yeah, a point seems right.
A point is fair, and let's close things out with Blink-182.
Blink-182 is an American rock band formed in Poway, California in 1992. And they were active from 92 to 2005, then again from 2009 to the present day. And we covered 3 albums. We started with Cheshire Cat from 1995. We then, this is when they were just Blink.
Right.
We then covered Enema of the State from 1999. And then we covered 9 from 2019.
Yes.
And Nick, it is in fact your turn to start.
Right. So, like you mentioned, well, like you kind of alluded to it, this first record, they started pressing it just as Blink. And then there was another band, I can't remember where they were Irish. that was also called Blink, and they threatened a lawsuit. So they had to change it to something else. So they put the dash 182
Yep.
and started repressing the record. So that's kind of an interesting little thing.
And I mean, honestly, it's really good for the other band because everybody knows Blink.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that other band, Blink. Nobody knows
right.
Blink 182.
No, not at all. But I'll tell you what, like right from the start of Carousel, instrumentally, super iconically, Blink 182. So at this point, Scott Rayner is playing the drums, so it's not Travis Barker yet. But Mark Hoppus and Tom DeLonge's bass and guitar styles, super recognizable right away. And that's a really good thing when the very first track on your very first album, and I had never heard a single song on this first album at all, instantly was like, this is Blink 182. I could recognize those two playing from a mile away, like absolutely on brand. So they had that kind of established right away. However, the one thing about Tom DeLonge and Mark Hoppus, both on this record, is vocals were way worse than they needed to be. Because here's the thing. Both of those guys can sing. They can sing.
Yeah.
I've heard other Blink 182 songs. They can both sing. They're fine. But they had not. The one thing they hadn't fully established was like becoming the flagship band of their style of pop punk. At this point, they're a little pop punk and a little just regular punk. They haven't quite like figured out where they wanted to be in terms of their overall sound as a band just yet. And because of that, I think they kind of like have that punk delivery of the vocals where it's like, let's just shout and not care how it sounds as much.
Yeah.
And it hurts them a little bit, I think, because they lean more punk than pop, like in a 70-30 kind of way, which they'll later kind of even out to get that signature sound. So the positives, at the end of the day, the positives are like there are sounds on the guitar and bass that are super recognizable and will become iconic, but they haven't gotten all the way there yet. And they haven't figured out that it's okay to sing well yet, but they'll get there. So, I mean, I'm not going to revisit the album if I'm being honest.
Yeah. So here's the thing. This album, and it's actually kind of refreshing to me because it's been a while since we have really had this happen. This is an album where you can hear the potential, but you also hear that it's like a bunch of super sloppy early 20-year-olds messing around making an album. Like, that's what's happening here. It's like a group of guys who are all, I think, in between 20 and 23, roughly. And they're just making music. And they're just shouting, and it's super sloppy. Like construction-wise, it's sloppy. Which is, Blink always walks that slippery slope between really paced and structured, like we've done Blink songs, and like you don't even think about it until you're singing the rock show, and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster, but I'm not strapped in at any moment. This entire song could fall apart if anybody is not like boom 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 boom. Like, you have to be. And I felt like the entire first album was them doing that same thing, but like 3/4 of the way through the song, it just, whoa, it's gone.
Sure.
So, like, bad in, like, it's bad.
Yeah.
But you can hear where it's potentially going to be good down the line,
Correct.
I think. Unlike with Blur, where, like, from Leisure, I didn't know Park Life was coming.
Sure.
With this, listening to Cheshire Cat, I could kind of hear that Enema of the State was coming, and I'm going to go into Enema of the State now. This album, talk about iconic album covers.
Yeah, definitely another one.
Enema of the State is one of the most iconic album covers of all time, I would say.
Yeah, definitely the last 25 years.
Yeah, definitely the last 25 years, probably all time. And this album is, I mean, this is the true iconic album of the week for me and for my generation. And this is the album where they just get it right. They get that roller coaster, that fast paced, just like it feels like you're just like running through an entire Blink album, like the entire time. This is also a group that has two distinctly different but both equally good vocalists.
Yes.
And that is super important because you have Tom DeLonge and his very nasally, like, all the small things. And then you have Mark Hoppus with like a much smoother kind of Barry voice to him.
Yeah.
And it plays really well. They really do a good job of sticking to their guns in terms of like, they know exactly what they're doing. Every song is between 2 and 3.5. I mean, there's one song that's 4 minutes.
Yeah, but it's Adam's song, and that's a great.
It's Adam's song, and every other song is right in that sweet spot of like in and out. You're in, you're out. We got this, like, and it's very well done. It's very tightly constructed. I really can hear the difference with Travis Barker on drums. It feels tighter. I actually feel like that's part of it. Like, I think Mark Hoppus, obviously, like, I was, we were joking around with Alex, but like the rhythm section is so fundamentally important, and especially when you're doing stuff like this.
For sure.
If the rhythm section is at any point not in sync, that's when the wheels come off the coaster. Mm-hmm. So, like, you can tell that Hoppus has like kind of locked in with Travis Barker in the rhythm section and are able to take those complex tempo and rhythm moves that they do in the band and really settle into them and make it seem effortless.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just, Barker is just a universally great drummer. And he's
Did you know he's married to a Kardashian now?
Fascinating. I didn't.
Yeah.
But I know he's a great drummer, and I think that really helps this record. And they fully realized what their sound is, like you mentioned. I mean, so now they're pop punk instead of just mostly punk with like a little bit of pop. And a lot of the original fans are like, this is where they sold out. They're not good anymore. But I think that history and like the vast majority of, a public opinion will definitely be against that. Like, this is really where they peaked. If you look at pretty much any list of like the top pop punk albums of all time, Rock Sound had this as number 1 on their list of 51. Kerrang had it at number 1. Rolling Stone had it at number 2. It's pretty much like the flagship or one of the biggest flagship albums of the entire movement. Sure. And one of the reasons that you didn't mention, because you're talking about how individual songs are, but there's also a really beautiful way a lot of these songs go right into the next one, where you almost don't even realize they've switched song because one song ended in the perfect spot for the next one to pick up, and it sounds like a flawless transition between movements instead of two different songs. Which is just so cool to hear on a record. I love that.
It's one of those things that you almost take for granted, because, like, here's the thing. I have heard every song on Enema of the State. This is probably the first time, because I'm not an album listener. I've become an album listener because of the podcast, but I've always been a, like, go down the rabbit hole of listening to songs and, like, so, like, that's something that, like, you may never even experience, but when you do and it hits you, it's such a cool thing.
Exactly.
Like, and it's really shifted my thought of, like, I enjoy listening to albums because, like, that's how the artist intended for you to listen to it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like the biggest thing that we miss listening to one or two songs at a time. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but it's just like a much better experience. It's at least worth doing like once or twice for an album like this, where there's such an intentionality behind the way the songs go into each other. And obviously, like, we didn't necessarily mention, we mentioned Adam's songs on this. Going Away to College is great. What's My Age Again? Classic. All the Small Things, classic.
Yeah.
A lot of the biggest songs in the genre. So now I shall move on to 9. And once again, we have had a personnel change, but this time it is Tom DeLonge, who is no longer with the group. He is off doing his conspiracy theory stuff. I guess, I don't know. But in case anyone didn't know, I think it's clear on Enema of the State because of the song Aliens Exist. Like, Tom DeLonge has just always been like kind of a conspiracy guy. Like, he's just super fascinated. That's his passion is conspiracy theories. So, good for him. But he's gone now, and they promoted this album 9 by going on a tour with Lil Wayne, which I just thought was interesting.
That is,
because it's not necessarily the type of artists that you would kind of put together for this. And I will say this: the band, when they were putting this album together, it's their second record without DeLonge, with Matt Skiba, or Skiba, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, taking over his role. And they were really concerned with progressing their sound. They needed to be more than just that same pop punk record over and over and over again, which I totally understand as an artist, which I respect as an artist. They put out a sound that's still recognizable as a Blink sound, but with a lot more modern context surrounding it here with 9. And a lot of that gives me pause. Not always. Some of it gave me pause. Some of it I was like, okay, this can happen. It definitely is not as strong as Enema of the State for me because of some of those things. But one thing that I thought was actually significantly better was they are no longer just like very immature 20-somethings in terms of their lyrics. Like, that was what was so endearing about Blink in their early work. Like, it was unabashedly, this is song for immature 18-year-olds, and like, that's what we are, and that's what we want to do. And it's like almost, endearing, like in its goofiness, in its intentional immaturity. But it's nice to hear because they're older now, they're adults, and they're progressing past that as well. Because it wouldn't, like, a lot of the Blink songs from 1999, those lyrics just would feel so inauthentic coming from a group of people in their 40s.
Yeah, that's
and it just wouldn't feel right.
Accurate.
And they absolutely did progress past that. But at the end of the day, like, this is just not the iteration of Blink for me. It certainly wasn't bad. Like, I didn't dislike listening to this, but it was a little too pop now for me to really want to go back and listen again, I think.
Sure. Here's what I'll say, okay? And it's very concise, I would say. This album is exactly what I would expect Blink to come out with in this era.
Sure.
And I am very happy they didn't jump the shark and go electro pop as so many bands before them have done. I really enjoyed this album. It does skew a little more pop. I know that. And there wasn't necessarily a moment where I felt the same way I felt listening to Enema of the State or to some of the other Blink songs that we all know. But, like, the band is still solid. The band is still playing super tight. And I did enjoy the maturity, like the maturing. Yeah. Not necessarily maturity, but the maturing.
Right. They had to move past that at some point,
Yeah, and so, like, all in all, super positive for me. When I saw the album cover, I was, like, literally terrified of what was going to happen. So, like, all of a sudden, no Tom DeLonge, and then I see the album cover, and it's, like, could easily just be, like, poppy bullcrap. And it wasn't. It was really good. It was, more pop, but still really good. Really enjoyed it. A couple things before we grade them.
Of course.
Just a couple, like, news blips that I think are interesting. So, one, This one's a little older. So Mark Hoppus, actually, after this album in 2021, so not too long ago, like revealed that he was battling stage 4 cancer.
Yeah.
And then, like, that same year beat stage 4
Yeah.
cancer.
Love to hear that.
Just, yeah. So on June 23rd, 2021, he accidentally shared a picture of himself undergoing chemo
Okay.
on his Instagram story. And then kind of, so he wasn't necessarily going public with it.
Okay.
Accidentally shared that and then announced that, yeah, he was, he said he was experiencing stage 4 diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is just that's not a good, like, I'm not saying any cancer is good, but there are good cancers and bad cancers to be diagnosed with. Stage 4 diffuse large B-cell lymphoma it's a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Like, that might be where you kind of, know it a little better from in the public word. Like, stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that's not,
it's
like,
scary.
you rarely come back from that.
Yeah.
And he beat it, and he's cancer free.
That's awesome.
He's obviously in the screening phase still because it's still,
Right.
a year ago basically. But just super happy for Mark Hoppus and his family. Like, that is such a great moment.
Totally.
Going into a little bit lighter stuff now. This is bleeding edge recent, like July 28th. We're recording on July 31st. There is heavy speculation. Blink has hinted at announcements that Tom DeLonge is coming back to the band.
Really?
Yeah, so both Tom DeLonge and Blink have shared, like, the same promos for, like, Blink 30 because it's their 30 and like there's multiple things like that. Also, what's his name? Matt Skiba.
Yeah.
Has, like, people have, like, asked him, like, on, like, Instagram and, like, comments and stuff, like, if he's still a part of the band, and he's like, your guess is as good as mine. Regardless, I'm proud and thankful for my time with Blink. Like, we shall see. Like, so he's very much being like, I don't know if I'm still in the band.
Interesting.
And, like, now they're so, like, everybody's pretty sure that Tom DeLonge is coming back to Blink.
It
is by the
I'm
time
curious.
you are hearing this, audio listeners, like,
we may know.
There's a potential that has already happened.
Yeah.
It's coming up soon.
Okay.
But interesting enough.
Yeah.
Just
while you're mentioning things, like, I know, I don't know if we'll count this in X Factor later on or anything, but Travis Barker also survived a plane crash, right?
Yes, he did, and I was going to bring that up in
Like
X
back in
Factor. That's
2008,
incredible.
yeah, like
because of
amazing.
plane crash and bands.
Yeah, exactly. But he's one of the few who, like, very luckily somehow survived the plane crash.
Which leads me to my question, and especially with Tom DeLonge being a conspiracy theorist like he is, are the members of Blink immortal deities? Can they be killed?
If they are,
because
then I think that's
two members of the
band
survived
very, like, life-threatening situations.
Very, like, low percentage life-threatening situations.
That's a good point. I think we should just give them 5 for X Factor right now.
It's insane. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Let's grade them for real.
Let's grade them. Okay. Cultural impact. It's very good. They are one of the most influential bands of the last 25 years.
Sure.
In fact, there were a few things like Alternative Press came out with a list of the top 30 most influential bands of the last 30 years and ranked Blink 4th, behind only Radiohead, Fugazi, and Nirvana, which is, like, pretty good list to be on, only behind those artists. They have started essentially their own sound brand in pop punk, where, like, there's so many of the artists that came right after them that you can tell that they are directly trying to sound like Blink. They've spawned a lot of different groups essentially. And obviously, they were enormously successful with their own music. I mean, I didn't even mention it, but, like, we're talking about in their prime, they were moving, 14, 15 million albums. So,
yeah.
Enema of the State sold 15 worldwide. Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, 14 million worldwide. So, I mean, like, enormously successful and influential. I think I'm looking at number in the eights, I would say.
I would probably agree with you. The other thing that this band did really well that was kind of deceptive, especially at the time, is because the time that they really were doing stuff was not pre-internet, but pre-internet as we know it.
Yeah, definitely.
In the 90s, like there wasn't really social media spaces or comments. So they were really good at almost creating a parasocial relationship with their fan base, where like they were like goofy and outgoing and prankish together, and their fans really felt like they were part of the social circle that Blink was in because of that.
Yeah.
Which like nowadays, like that's the same mental faculty thing you get for like Twitch streamers or things like that, where like your fan base feels connected to you on a personal level, not just through your art. So like that is something that not a lot of groups were doing at the time. And that's just something that I think adds a little bit. That's interesting to me. That's something that is unique almost.
Yeah.
But I'm very comfortable going like in the eights.
How about an 8.5?
8.5 is perfect.
All right. So breadth of work, we are talking about 8 studio albums, so a little bit above the average. We're talking about 50 million albums sold worldwide. And I think we're talking about more good than bad. So
sure, absolutely.
I think that all together probably puts this band right around a 7.
Yeah, I think that
it's hard to go much lower than that when you're talking.
It's hard to go. I would definitely not be trying to go lower.
Yeah, and you're not taking anything away for the quality, and I mean it's all good stuff here.
Here's where I'm at. Okay, if I'm looking at the 3 albums we did.
Sure.
Cheshire Cat was bad with potential.
Sure.
Bad with potential. I'm okay with that.
Enema of the State, classic.
Enema of the State's their 3rd album, and it's very good.
Very good.
And when you get to 9, I would say it's still way more good than bad. Good plus.
Sure.
Not necessarily great like Enema of the State was, but it's hard to catch that lightning in a bottle. It's good. So you're way more good than bad. The only question mark in my head is Dude Ranch. If Dude Ranch is more like Enema than Cheshire Cat.
So I think it's halfway, because I mean I'm gonna be honest, like there's a lot on here that I don't necessarily know, but their first, I would say, really big hit did spawn from that record, which is Damn It. That's on the record, which is definitely a band that's transitioning towards their signature sound.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm fine going maybe even a little higher, not crazy high, but like
7.2.
Yeah, like a 7.2, 7.3. That's great.
All right, that brings us to instrumental. So I'm going to be honest, like the first record, I think nerfs them the tiniest bit because they were intentionally worse than they needed to be. But you have 2 good singers here. I think the guitar playing and the bass playing are both iconic. They're, I'm not going to say they're the technically greatest instrumentalists in the world, but they right away cultivated a sound and a style that is instantly recognizable as their own, which I think is definitely worth something, because if you can't be the technically greatest instrumentalist, then you'd better find your voice and let people know who you are. And I think they have executed that to perfection. And Travis Barker is an excellent drummer.
Yes, and I think, Travis Barker is excellent. I think that him and Mark Hoppus together are like sneaky underrated in how well they hold down a difficult rhythm section. Like you're not necessarily like just the constant fast paced
it's like it's an exercise.
Let me put it to you this way, okay? We have done Blink songs with various iterations of our band. And more so than most, I would say, when Blink is off tempo, it is atrocious to be a part of.
Yeah.
Like when you're doing a Blink 182 song and the tempo is not right, at least on me, I don't know how you felt,
Mm.
I wanted to crawl out of my skin.
I hear you.
It felt so bad. So I give them so much props, like high praise from me.
Where do you want to be?
I mean, we're above average.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I'm
obvious.
just not outrageously high.
No, we're
of the
not. I'm not
nature that
talking
they
like
play.
I'm not talking like they're 9s, but
Yeah,
I would say they're probably above a 5.5.
and I'm
I would
fine
say
with
they're
that.
in between the 5.5 to 6 range.
And I'm totally good
Wherever
going
you want to
halfway
go
in
there.
between. So I'll put them at 5.8 because that's halfway in between 5.75 rounding up, and
I
I'm
love
very
it.
comfortable there.
I love it.
And then here's the thing: songwriting. They developed again. I think we're talking about another group here, which we've talked about a lot of this season, honestly. That is about as important to their sound as anyone can be. So while the compositions themselves don't necessarily need to be particularly complex, it is an iconic sound that they cultivated and created. And you know what? Credit where credit is due. Like, once they realized that they were a pop punk band and not a punk band, they got much more creative with the harmonies and vocals and layering, and like definitely added a little bit more to what they were doing in the studio.
Now, here's what I'll say. When you're done.
Yeah, no. That's what I was gonna. That's where I wanted to give credit.
Okay. Now, we've been waxing a little poetic, and I want to be real here. I want to not necessarily knock them down a peg, but like be real.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from.
Oh, it's the lowest of the scores so far.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. The fact remains, I could take every Blink-182 song that is popular, every popular one, and pretty easily mash them all up.
Easy.
Or just maybe even just sing the lyrics to one over the melody of another. They're all similar sounding.
They're mostly 4-chord songs. They're mostly 4-chord songs. And so that definitely is. I was giving them all the credit that I could think of.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, cultivating the style is going to balance out with just the absolute simplicity of the music overall
and
here.
That's kind of it.
It's going to bring them back down to earth, essentially. Like, to me, that's like, that almost just sits them back at average, because what they're doing is just so simple, but they manage to make that simplicity a new sound for everyone to enjoy.
I am more than okay going right at a 5.
Perfect. And then poetic talent. I mean, we alluded to it. Like, look, it was not something that they took particularly seriously. It was about being immature and having fun. Like, that was what a lot of their iconic stuff is about. So, like, because it was intentional, it's not bad per se.
Yeah.
But it is just kind of like goofy and immature.
No, and I mean, here's the thing. I would say that they're a little below average, but not like there's a below average for just existing, and then there's a below average for writing cheesy bad.
Sure.
And I don't think they wrote cheesy bad. I think like a lot of their stuff is like very repetitive, and that's fine. And they also didn't really, metaphors don't really exist. They're very literal.
Yeah. I mean, where do you want to go? Like in the 4 somewhere?
Yeah, like 4? Maybe like a 4.5, 4, in like either a 4, 4, 4, 5, or 4, 6. You decide.
I'll give them the 4, 5. We'll go in the middle. And now X Factor. And again, I think we have a case for some stuff for X Factor here. Sure. I would say again, they are the flagship band of the pop punk movement. I mean, the only other argument is maybe Green Day, but I feel like that is such a different and distinct branch of modern punk that like there's a definitive separation between the Blink-182 bands and the Green Day bands, you know?
Sure.
So maybe not a full like 2 points or anything like that, but it's definitely something. And we mentioned the Travis Barker plane crash. I would also like to mention, I don't know if you've ever seen the music video for The Rock Show. The song The Rock Show?
I did. You know what? I did when we learned it.
Can I tell you about it?
Yeah.
So basically, the studio is like, here is $500,000. We need you to make a music video for The Rock Show. And they just like took homeless people to the spa and handed out a bunch of the cash to strangers on the streets, and they like paid professional dancers to go mow lawns, and like they were just giving out. They basically took $500,000 and just gave it to everyone that they came across, and just did weird stuff. And I just thought it was fascinating that they used that as an excuse to just pay $500,000 out to random strangers.
It was,
which is
absolutely. I mean, that is quite cool.
Yeah, I think it's worth something. So that's where I'm at. Those things together, it depends on how many X Factor points you want that to be. Maybe a little bit over 1.
Yeah, I was thinking like a 1-3.
And I love it. And that's
where I lived.
Final scores for you today, Patrick.
Okay.
All right. And losing this week's episode.
I have a 2-inch micro penis.
is Joy Division with a 10.7.
Oh, double digits.
Yeah, they got just barely because of the X Factor.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. But winning this week's episode.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
With a 32.3 is Blink 182. And
yeah,
Joy Division,
I mean,
yeah, it's expected. Joy Division sat in between them, much closer to Blink with a 27.9.
Wait.
Or no. Excuse me, Blur sat much closer to Blink. Sorry. Blur and Blink. Blur 27.9, Blink 32.3,
like,
Joy Division 10.7.
My heart is palpitating that you said that. I was like, no.
No, Joy Division. You know, because I was about to also say, Joy Division was still 17.2 points away from tying for second. They were like more than double their score away.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they would have to triple their score and still would have lost to Blink.
Well, that's about it. This was a surprising week, I think. A week that I expected bad and got bad. I expected good and got good. And then I wasn't expecting really anything for Blur and was pleasantly surprised by more than I wasn't.
Very good.
So Blur was my swing here, and they made it a good week.
Good.
If Blur sucked, it would have been a bad week even though
Sure.
Blink was here.
Now, please make sure that you come back next week and listen to us talk about Sonic Youth.
Yeah, the youth, the Sonics.
Yes, that is all. I have nothing left to say. Play us out, Patrick.
So listen, if you're here, that means you must like something about us. And if you like something about us, please tell everyone. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell people on the street. Word of mouth is a huge way to grow a burgeoning young podcast like us in our 5th season, burgeoning young. But we are still actively trying to grow. And the other thing, especially this season, that we're looking for is some feedback. I would love to hear from you, our listeners, what you like about Totem Talks, what you would change if you could about Totem Talks, what really grinds your gears or is the reason you're tuning in every week. Is it just to hear Nick's sultry voice? I mean, who knows? The answers are clear to you, but we would like to know. We're always down to change things or to adapt. And to adapt, you need to know what the people want. So that is a call to arms for all of you young listeners to let us know how we're doing, what you like, and what we could do better. And that's what I have to say about that. Now I'm going to play us out. Keep tuning in. Make sure you're also listening to our year in review or year in music for the year 1967. We're going month by month as each month happens. And make sure on top of all that, you're having a great day.